In 2019, two accountants sat 3 desks apart in the same office. Same title, same salary, same 15 years of experience. If you looked at their resumes side by side, you couldn't tell them apart. One of them, we'll call him Mark, felt completely secure. He'd been doing the same type of work for over a decade, reconciling numbers, preparing reports, running the same spreadsheets every month. He figured, accounting will always need people. Machines can't understand context the way I do. The other, we'll call her Elena, had a strange habit. Every few months, she'd ask herself an uncomfortable question. If a piece of software could do 80% of what I do today, what would the remaining 20% look like? And am I good at that 20%? By 2023, an AI-powered accounting platform rolled out across their company. It could reconcile ledgers in seconds, flag anomalies humans usually missed, and generate reports that used to take Mark 2 full days to finish. Within 18 months, Mark's role was restructured. His job, as he'd known it for 15 years, no longer existed. Elena's job didn't disappear. It changed. She spent less time doing the mechanical parts of accounting and more time interpreting what the numbers meant for the business, advising leadership, and catching the kind of nuanced judgment calls the software still couldn't make. Same starting point, same industry, same disruption, 2 completely different outcomes. So here's the question this video is really about. Was Elena just lucky? Or did she understand something about the future of work that Mark didn't? Because here's what makes this story so unsettling. Mark didn't fail because he was bad at his job. By every traditional measure, he was excellent. He showed up early. He double-checked his work. He never missed a deadline in 15 years. If you had asked anyone in that office who the hardest worker was, most people would have said Mark's name before Elena's. That's exactly what makes this story worth paying attention to. This isn't a story about laziness versus ambition or talent versus mediocrity. It's a story about 2 people who were, by almost every conventional standard, equally deserving of job security, and only one of them kept it. If the old rules of career safety, work hard, be reliable, master your craft were still enough on their own, Mark should have been fine. He wasn't, and that single fact should make every person watching this pause and ask, which one of these 2 people do my daily habits actually resemble? Here's the uncomfortable truth. This story has almost nothing to do with intelligence, effort, or even how good someone is at their job in the traditional sense. It has to do with something most people have never been taught to think about: the shape of their work, not just the title of their job. Most of us were raised with a simple idea: get a stable job, work hard, and you'll be fine. For most of the 20th century, that was largely true. Jobs were stable categories: accountant, radiologist, paralegal, customer service rep. You picked a lane, you stayed in it, and the job protected you. AI breaks that assumption not because it replaces jobs, but because it replaces tasks. And every job, no matter the title, is really just a bundle of tasks stitched together. This is the hidden insight almost nobody talks about. No job is entirely AI-proof, but very few jobs are entirely AI vulnerable either. The real question isn't, will AI take my job? It's what percentage of my daily tasks can already be done faster, cheaper, or more accurately by a machine, and what's left over. That what's left over question is where your entire financial future for the next 20 years is quietly being decided. And here's why this reframe matters so much. It changes what you should actually be worried about. Most people worry about the wrong thing. They worry about whether their industry will exist in 10 years. But industries rarely disappear overnight. Accounting isn't disappearing. Law isn't disappearing. Marketing isn't disappearing. What disappears quietly, task by task, is the specific bundle of activities that used to justify a specific paycheck. This is why so many predictions about the jobs AI will replace end up being wrong in the headlines, but right underneath the surface. Radiologists weren't replaced, but the portion of a radiologist's day spent on routine image screening shrank dramatically, and the radiologists who thrived were the ones who shifted toward complex diagnosis, patient communication, and clinical judgment, the parts of the job that were never just about reading a scan. The same pattern is playing out right now in accounting, law, customer service, journalism, software development, and dozens of other fields that look completely unrelated on the surface, but share the exact same underlying structure, a mix of routine tasks and judgment tasks, with the ratio between them quietly shifting every year. Let's break this down simply. Because the concept is actually not complicated once you see it clearly. Every job can be split into two categories of tasks. Category 1, routine, pattern-based tasks. These are tasks with a clear input, a clear output, and a repeatable process. Data entry, basic scheduling, standard report generation, simple coding tasks, first draft writing, basic customer questions. These tasks follow patterns, and patterns are exactly what AI systems are built to learn. Category 2, judgment-based, relational and context-heavy tasks. These are tasks that require reading a room, understanding unstated context, weighing competing values, taking responsibility for a decision, or building trust with another human being, deciding whether to fire an underperforming employee with a sick parent, calming down a furious client, knowing when a data point is technically correct but strategically misleading, persuading a skeptical room of executives to take a risk. Here's the part that surprises most people. Almost every job, from surgeon to sales rep to software engineer, contains both categories. The mistake Mark made wasn't being an accountant. It was spending 15 years getting extremely good at Category 1 tasks and never developing Category 2 skills because Category 1 was comfortable and measurable. Think of it like a receding tide. AI is the tide, and Category 1 tasks are the beach. As the tide comes in, the flat, exposed sand disappears first, but the rocks, the Category 2 skills, stay above water the longest because they're harder to reach and harder to shape. The people who will struggle most in the next 10 years aren't the ones in low-skill jobs or high-skill jobs. They're the ones whose daily work is almost entirely flat beach, heavily routine, heavily repeatable, heavily pattern-based regardless of how prestigious the job title sounds. And the people who will do fine, even thrive, are the ones who've built their careers on rocks, judgment, relationships, context, accountability, and creative problem-solving in messy, ambiguous situations. There's a second layer to this that most explanations of AI and jobs completely skip over. The tide doesn't just remove sand, it also raises the water level for everyone still standing on rock. As routine tasks get automated, the baseline expectation for what counts as good work rises. A junior employee today is expected to produce, in judgment and output, what used to take a senior employee 5 years to develop, because the tools have absorbed so much of the groundwork. This means the bar for the human portion of every job is quietly climbing every year, even as the total amount of routine work shrinks. It's not enough to simply keep your job. The job itself is being redefined underneath you, whether you notice it or not. The people who get ahead aren't the ones who resist that redefinition. They're the ones who actively participate in shaping what their role becomes next. Think about bank tellers. ATMs were supposed to eliminate the role entirely back in the 1970s and 80s. They didn't. Instead, the number of tellers per branch dropped, but the role itself shifted from counting cash to advising customers on loans, accounts, and financial products, work that required judgment and relationship building, not just transaction processing. The task changed. The job survived. That's the pattern that keeps repeating, decade after decade, technology after technology, and it's the pattern almost nobody bothers to study before panicking about the next wave. To make this practical, let's break it into 4 forces that determine how exposed or protected your income actually is. Force 1. Task predictability. The more predictable your daily tasks are, the more exposed you are. If your job could be described accurately as do X, then Y, then Z every single day, that's a warning sign, not because your job is easy, but because predictability is precisely what machine learning systems are optimized to absorb. Example, a customer service rep who reads from an approved script and answers the same 10 questions repeatedly is far more exposed than one who de-escalates angry customers, makes exceptions based on judgment, and represents the brand's reputation in unscripted moments. Here's a simple test you can run on your own role. Could a new employee with 0 experience follow a detailed written manual and produce roughly the same output as you on most days? If the honest answer is yes, that portion of your job is highly exposed, not because you're replaceable as a person, but because that specific task has already been reduced to a repeatable procedure, and repeatable procedures are the first thing any automation system targets. Force 2. Accountability and liability. The more a task involves someone being personally responsible when something goes wrong, the more protected it is. companies and society are still deeply reluctant to let a machine be the final point of accountability, especially in medicine, law, safety, and finance. Example, an AI can draft a legal contract in seconds. It cannot yet be the one who stands in front of a judge and takes responsibility for the strategy behind that contract. The drafting is exposed. The accountability is not, at least not yet. This is also why fields like medicine, aviation, and structural engineering remain resilient even as AI diagnostic tools, autopilot systems, and design software become dramatically more capable. The technology can outperform a human at the narrow technical task, but organizations and regulators still require a human name attached to the final decision. Until that changes, and it's a much bigger shift than a technical one, involving law, insurance, and public trust accountability, will remain one of the strongest forms of job protection that exists. Force 3. Relationship depth. The more a role depends on earned human trust, not just competence, but relationship, the more insulated it is. People buy from people they trust. Patients open up to doctors who make them feel heard. Teams follow leaders who they believe care about them. Example, 2 financial advisors can give technically identical investment advice. The one whose clients trust him personally will keep his book of business even as AI-powered financial tools get cheaper and more accurate. The one who was only valued for calculations will lose clients to a $10 a month app. This is worth sitting with because it explains a pattern that confuses a lot of people. Why do some professions with easily automatable technical cores, like financial planning, or even certain areas of medicine, remain stubbornly resistant to disruption? It's because the technical core was never really the product. The product was trust. People don't pay a financial advisor purely for portfolio math. They pay for someone to tell them the truth during a market crash, to talk them out of panic selling, and to be a calm, accountable presence during the most emotionally charged decisions of their financial life. No algorithm has yet replicated that kind of relationship at scale, and it's not obvious that one ever fully will. Force 4. Ambiguity tolerance. The more a role requires making good decisions with incomplete, contradictory, or emotionally loaded information, the more protected it is. AI systems are extraordinary at optimizing within a defined problem. They're still weak at defining what the right problem even is when the situation is messy. Example, a junior analyst can be told, build a model for this. A senior strategist has to decide which model even matters when the market itself is behaving irrationally. That second skill is rare, valuable, and very hard to automate. This force is often the hardest one for people to develop deliberately, because ambiguity is uncomfortable by nature. Most training in school and early careers rewards finding the single correct answer as quickly as possible. But senior, well-compensated roles almost always involve situations where there isn't a single correct answer, where 2 reasonable, well-informed people could look at the same information and reach different conclusions. Building comfort with that discomfort, rather than avoiding it, is one of the most underrated career investments a person can make. If you map your own job honestly against these 4 forces, predictability, accountability, relationship depth, and ambiguity tolerance, you'll get a far more accurate picture of your real exposure than any headline about the jobs AI will replace. Most people score high on 1 or 2 of these forces and low on the others without ever realizing it, simply because nobody ever taught them to think about their job in these terms. Let's go back to Mark and Elena, but this time, let's really look at what happened month by month. For years, Mark's version of doing a good job meant getting his monthly reports done faster and with fewer errors than anyone else. He was, genuinely, excellent at this, but every improvement he made, every shortcut, every template, every efficiency was, without him realizing it, teaching the company exactly what a machine would eventually need to replicate. He was, in a sense, unknowingly writing the training manual for his own replacement. Elena, meanwhile, spent part of her time each month doing something that looked, on the surface, less productive. She sat in on budget meetings that weren't required. She asked leadership why certain numbers mattered, not just what the numbers were. She built relationships with department heads so that when something looked off in the data, people came to her first before it became a crisis. When the AI platform arrived, it did exactly what AI tools do. It absorbed the predictable, template-driven 80% almost instantly. For Mark, that 80% was his job description. There was barely a 20% left to stand on. For Elena, that 80% was just the input to her actual value. The AI didn't replace her, it made her faster at the mechanical part. which freed up more time for the part only she could do: interpreting, advising, building trust, and taking responsibility for recommendations. 6 months after the rollout, Elena wasn't just still employed. She was promoted to oversee the very AI system that had displaced her former colleague, because she was one of the few people in the department who understood both the numbers and the people affected by them. Same disruption, same technology, two completely different financial trajectories, one that led to unemployment and one that led to a promotion. It's worth noting what Elena did not do, because it's just as instructive as what she did do. She didn't quit her job to learn to code. She didn't go back to school for a completely unrelated degree. She didn't panic and abandon accounting altogether out of fear that the entire field was doomed. She stayed exactly where she was, doing fundamentally the same type of work as Mark, but she quietly shifted the balance of her time, over years, toward the parts of the job that compounded in value instead of eroding. That distinction matters, because a lot of career anxiety pushes people toward dramatic, expensive decisions, a total career pivot, an unnecessary second degree, abandoning a field they're genuinely good at when the more effective move is usually smaller and less dramatic, shifting the ratio of your time and attention within the career you already have. So what do you actually do with this information? Here are 5 concrete steps you can start applying this week, regardless of your industry. Step 1. Audit your own task list honestly. Write down everything you did at work over the last 2 weeks. For each task, ask, is this predictable and repeatable, or does it require judgment, relationships, or accountability? Most people are shocked by how much of their week falls into the predictable column. Step 2. Move toward the interpretation layer of your job, not just the execution layer. If you're in marketing, don't just write the copy, understand why the campaign strategy matters to the business. If you're in customer support, don't just answer tickets, become the person who spots patterns in why customers are upset and proposes fixes. Step 3. Build visible relationships, not just visible output. Being excellent at your tasks protects you less than being trusted by the people around you. Invest time in being someone colleagues, clients, or leadership specifically want in the room, not because of your title, but because of how you make decisions. Step 4. Learn to work with AI tools before your company forces you to. The people who get displaced aren't usually the ones who lose to AI directly. They're the ones who lose to a coworker who learned to use AI as a force multiplier 6 months earlier. Being fluent with these tools moves you from replaceable input to the person who directs the machine. Step 5. Deliberately seek out ambiguous, messy problems. Volunteer for the project nobody has a clear playbook for. It's uncomfortable, but it's also exactly where your long-term value compounds, because that discomfort is precisely what current AI systems struggle with most. None of these steps require quitting your job, going back to school, or making a dramatic career change. They require a shift in where you spend your attention within the job you already have. It's worth adding one more practical note here, because it changes how you should think about your next performance review, your next job application, or your next conversation with a manager. Stop describing your value purely in terms of output. I processed X reports, or I handled Y tickets. Start describing your value in terms of judgment and outcomes. I identified a pattern that saved the department $40,000, or I was the person leadership trusted to handle the client relationship during a crisis. That shift in language isn't just marketing. It forces you to actually notice and then deliberately build the parts of your work that are hardest to automate. Here's the part that explains why so many capable, hardworking people still end up like Mark instead of Elena, and it isn't laziness or lack of talent. It's comfort. Predictable tasks feel safe because they're measurable. You can point to a finished report and say, I did this. Judgment-based work is harder to quantify. It feels less productive in the moment, even though it's often more valuable over time. So most people understandably gravitate toward the comfortable, visible, easily measured work and quietly avoid the ambiguous, relationship-heavy work that actually protects them. There's also a deeper fear at play. Many people avoid stepping into judgment-heavy work because it comes with real accountability. If you just execute a task and it goes wrong, you can say, I followed the process. If you exercise judgment and it goes wrong, it's yours. That risk is uncomfortable, but it's also exactly why that kind of work is and will remain valuable. Machines can absorb risk-free repetition. They cannot yet absorb the emotional weight of being the one who's accountable when a hard call turns out to be wrong. This is the quiet psychological trap. The very habits that make people feel safe today, routine, measurable, low-risk tasks, are the same habits that make them most exposed tomorrow. And the very habits that feel uncomfortable and unrewarded today, ambiguity, relationship building, accountability, are the same habits that will protect their income for the next decade. There's also a social dimension to this trap that's rarely discussed. Many workplaces still reward visible busyness over invisible judgment. The employee who answers 200 emails a day often gets praised in the moment, while the employee who spent an hour thinking carefully about a difficult decision or having an uncomfortable conversation to prevent a bigger problem down the line often goes unnoticed. This mismatch between what gets praised short-term and what actually protects people long-term is part of why so many talented, hardworking people end up blindsided. It's not that they weren't paying attention, it's that they were paying attention to the wrong signals, because those were the signals their environment kept rewarding. Breaking out of this pattern requires a kind of quiet discipline, choosing to invest in the parts of your work that feel less immediately rewarding, because you understand, even when no one around you seems to, that they're the parts that will still matter 5 years from now. So picture 2 versions of your career 5 years from now. In the first version, you kept doing what felt safe. You got faster at your tasks. You avoided the messy meetings, the uncomfortable conversations, the ambiguous projects nobody wanted. One day, a new tool rolls out at your company, faster, cheaper, tireless, and it turns out it can do the thing you spent years perfecting in a fraction of the time. You're not lazy. You're not unintelligent. You just built your entire professional identity on flat, exposed beach, and the tide came in exactly the way it always does. In the second version, you took the uncomfortable path. You leaned into judgment, into relationships, into being the person who takes responsibility when things get messy. You learned to direct the same tools that displaced others instead of competing against them. When the tide came in, it didn't wash you away, it lifted the boat you'd already built. The truth is, no job title on Earth is fully AI-proof, but almost every person can become more AI resilient, not by resisting technology, but by deliberately investing in the parts of work that remain irreducibly human: judgment, trust, accountability, and the willingness to sit with discomfort other people avoid. The tide is coming in either way. The only real question left is which part of the shoreline you're standing on, because here's the part worth remembering after this video ends. Nobody is going to send you a notification the day your job quietly starts shifting under you. There won't be a dramatic announcement. It will look exactly like it looked for Mark, a new software rollout, described as a tool to help you work faster. It will feel harmless, even helpful, right up until the day someone realizes the tool no longer needs you standing next to it. The people who come out ahead aren't the ones who saw the disruption coming with perfect clarity years in advance. They're the ones who quietly and consistently kept asking the same uncomfortable question Elena asked herself every few months. If a machine could do most of what I do today, what would be left? And am I actually good at that? That single habit, repeated often enough, is what separates a career that gets automated out from underneath you from one that ends up steering the machine instead. So before you close this video, take 30 seconds and actually ask yourself that question about your own work, not in a general, abstract way specifically, about the tasks that filled your calendar this past week. Which of them were flat beach? And which of them were rock? That one honest answer, more than any resume line or job title, is the truest predictor of where you'll stand 5 years from now.